Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Matt Kelly for another episode of the award-winning Compliance Into the Weeds. Welcome back, Matt.
Hello, Tom. Good to be here as always.
Matt, I'm thrilled to announce to our listeners that we are in the top 10 of management podcast in the UAE. So shout out to all our UAE listeners out there.
That's wonderful news. Hello to everybody.
Let's transition over to a great corporate scandal we have going on in our midst, and that's the NBA betting scandal. This broke like a bombshell last week, and I think we're going to be data mining this for a long time because of the really numerous compliance lessons here, Matt. And if I could, maybe I could set the stage. There are really two separate indictments here. One is on an issue where certain NBA players were alleged to have recruited marks to come in and have their money stolen in rigged games. And I'm going to leave that one for the most part aside and focus on the sports betting part of it, because we have three NBA individuals named: Mike Rozier, who's a player; Damon Jones, who is an assistant coach and has had other roles in the NBA, a former player; and the name in the group is Chauncey Billups. And Chauncey is incredibly significant in the NBA. He's a finals MVP. He's a finals champion with the Detroit Pistons. He is a Hall of Fame member of the NBA. And most importantly, he is currently, or was currently until last week, a head coach in the NBA. And each one has had different allegations made against them. Let me start with Mike Rozier, who is alleged to have pulled himself out of game or games early and given that information, alleging an injury, and given that information to nefarious actors who then used that information to bet on, like, prop bets that he would not reach his allotted points for that game, or as the betting world would say, he would hit an under. Damon Jones is alleged to have given information that while he was on the staff of the Los Angeles Lakers, that LeBron James would not be playing in a certain game. And that information was then used by bettors to bet against the LA Lakers. And Chauncey Billups is alleged to have given information that his team last year would be tanking or trying not to win. I'm not sure trying to lose is the right phrase, but perhaps in certain games, and the starters would not play. And so bettors were able to use that information to bet against the Portland Trail Blazers. The key theme to all of these is information. Mm-hmm. And whether you call it inside information from the corporate world or information, just plain information that became available to the gamblers before it became public, it's still information. That's the facts as alleged in the indictment. There may be others indicted. I will note one of the things I hope we can talk about is Mike Rozier was accused of this in 2023, and the NBA investigated it and cleared him of these allegations. That it has not happened as yet with Chauncey Billups or Damon Jones. I want to talk about maybe internal investigations as well from the compliance perspective. But maybe we could get your initial thoughts on the scandal and what compliance professionals might glean from it.
Oh, well, we could take this in a zillion different directions. I suppose you mentioned the importance of information several times, and I think that's right, that if we wanted to use the legal term of art, maybe from securities law, this is material, non-public information that people were exploiting. And if we tossed around that term in a corporate setting ahead of earnings season, the general counsel would be breathing into a paper bag. They would be so upset and frustrated. And clearly, I think this is at least as severe as that. The two things that jumped out to me first were the persistent nature of this problem, because, Tom, let's all remember that in 2024, we had a mini scandal around betting where the NBA imposed a lifetime ban on that player, Jonte Porter, who I think was playing for Toronto at the time. And he was betting on his own performance on prop bets. And prop bets are a bet on something that's happening in the game that is not relevant to whether the team wins or loses. You could have a prop bet on, is somebody going to go out on an injury? Are they playing for 15 minutes or more, or 15 minutes or less? Are they going to make three-pointers? All sorts of stuff. But actually, I do think that might be that's important to call out, because I think there are different types of risks here. I was looking at all of this and thinking that this is a flawed risk assessment from the NBA. I will admit I am not a big gambler. I'm really not a sports gambler at all. And I don't follow the NBA all that closely. But it seems to me that a player would be able to manipulate a prop bet more than they would be able to engage in fixing games or point shaving, because fixing games and point shaving is probably going to get noticed more often. You might have other players who are wondering, what are you doing? Maybe they're going to be in on it. Well, now it's a conspiracy. Like, it's harder to fix a game. It's harder to shave points when the entire world is watching the game. It's easier to manipulate a prop bet because you can make up prop bets on the fly. Everybody knows what a game score is and if somebody wins or loses. But prop bets are more fluid, and therefore they should deserve more attention from the NBA about, are we going to have a gambling problem here? And I'm going to guess that maybe the NBA flubbed this up because, as you said, at least one of the players indicted today, or one of the conspirators, participants indicted lately, they were already investigated before. Chauncey Porter was investigated and banned at the start of 2024, where Adam Silver, the NBA commissioner, said this seems to be a one-off thing and this should send the right signal. Okay, well, it didn't and it wasn't. But the other thing that caught my eye about all of this actually is the importance of data analytics, because we have to remember, how did people start to realize something weird is going on here? The sportsbooks people realized there was something going on here because they analyze every scrap of sports performance data possible so they can make bets on it. But going back, for example, to Chauncey Porter a year ago, the reason the NBA woke up to this is because the sports books realized, why on earth is this middle of the road player suddenly getting huge interest on prop bets? That makes no sense. And they investigated, they found out that things were amiss, and they banned Chauncey Porter. And it was largely the same sort of mechanism here, according to the media I've read, that the sports books and their data analytics were able to suss out that there's weird stuff going on with these players and these games. So maybe there's an issue we should investigate. And they did. And then next thing you know, the FBI is involved and it all unravels. But, it's the same sort of lesson that struck me a year ago when Chauncey Porter was banned, was the importance of data analytics, the importance of proper risk assessment. To your point, Tom, maybe about the importance of investigations, because you weren't even talking about Chauncey Porter. You were talking about a separate prior incident that was investigated and apparently cleared, and apparently wrongly, because here we are today. And Adam Silver, at the time in 2024, when he was saying, this seems to be an isolated incident, we hope this will send the right message, did he not know that investigations were, I believe, already happening? Because a lot of this misconduct we're talking about now had happened in 2023. And I guess we need a little timeline PowerPoint slide or something to go with this podcast to sketch it all out. But this has been a long-running problem with the NBA, and they haven't been able to solve it. So I'm thinking more in terms of risk assessment. What's the data you're looking at? How are you unraveling this? People can talk about policies and training and things like that for players, but I do think that if a player is determined to cheat, they're going to find a way to cheat. So your real concern there as a compliance perspective is they're really going to cheat. You have to find a way to intercept that and block it, not necessarily to convince them not to cheat. I'm not quite sure what more policy and training could be done there to tell them not to cheat, because they're cheating.
Well, for those who are interested in a timeline, check out my blog on Wednesday, because I do a timeline history of basketball betting scandals, starting with CCNY in the 1950s going forward until this scandal. So you can find out all about those. Interestingly, your same observations about data came up in an Arizona State basketball scandal from 1994, where the bets were not on props, but no, Las Vegas sports books noted wild swings in the point spread, and they reported that to the NCAA. So the data analytics capabilities of either sports books from large casinos or betting houses or sports betting companies that we have today are a great detection tool, but they're not a prevention tool. They're a detection tool. And one of the arguments I've read over the weekend was that, well, it's better for the sports leagues and the NBA to be in bed with these companies because it gives them a detection tool that if everything was driven underground and these same bets were being made overseas or offshore, would not be available to the NBA. That really leads to the next point I would want to explore with you, Matt. Does the NBA have some sort of conflict of interest here? Because I don't want to say they're in bed with these sports betting companies, but they are all sponsors of NBA teams. They're sponsors at arenas. There are marketing agreements. There are partnerships around some sort of rev share in all of this. And does that cloud any of your analysis or just make it harder, maybe easier?
I think it clarifies my analysis that yes, the NBA is in bed with these things. If that's not what being in bed with a partner is, then what on earth is being in bed with them? These sports books, these betting apps and whatnot, like you said, they are sponsoring games, they're showing up in advertising. There's this whole, I would have 10 years ago called it the media sports industrial complex. Now it's the media sports gambling industrial complex because ESPN has its own app to help you manage your sports betting and you track all of your data and whatnot. So where does the media end and the team play begin and the gambling app begin or end? It's all very blurry. So there is inherently a conflict here. And I I don't know. I see the logical argument that the NBA might as well be in bed with these apps because if they aren't, then the betting activity won't be transparent to them. I don't know. It seems to me that since the Supreme Court allowed sports betting nationwide in 2018, and this really has become mainstream, that's when we've had more of these problems. Unless there's more of your timeline. I haven't seen your timeline post yet, but it feels to me, it seems to me that this has really taken off only since 2018 when A, sports betting was legalized across the United States, and B, we had more apps and more data and analytics capability for players, for bettors, for everybody. But Adam Silver, who is the NBA commissioner, he was the one who made the choice to do this. And his predecessor, David Stern, made a conscious decision not to get in bed with this and not really to give a great big bear hug to sports betting. He did not want a team in the Las Vegas, the sports capital of the world, the sports betting capital of the world. And I don't know, we didn't have these problems under David Stern. Now, is that because we didn't know we had the problems when they were swept under the rug, or was it because we did not have these problems? It's hard for me to discern, but I don't feel like what we're doing now is the right answer because it's just one example after another of a persistent problem of ethical misconduct by players, coaches, and this entire ecosystem.
Well, we've had three major college point shaving scandals. I mentioned CCNY in the 50s. It extended out to some other colleges and universities, notably the University of Kentucky. In 1978-79, we had BC was caught up in a point shaving scandal, and that was actually memorialized in the movie and book Goodfellas, if you remember that. And then I mentioned the Arizona State scandal in 1994. Now, of course, we're over to the pros. And some of the commentary suggested, well, let's just get rid of the under bets. Say you could magically do that. First of all, who would make that decision? Would that be the sports betting companies? I would think so, but maybe the NBA says don't do it and they do it. But as we've seen, there are other ways for gamblers to get involved, and I'm not sure that getting rid of prop bets only is going to solve this problem.
That's a good point. I don't know, but it gets back to what I had said originally. Let's keep our eye on the ball, no pun intended, about where your risks of misconduct actually are. They're with the prop bets because it is harder to assess is somebody throwing a prop bet than it is, I believe, to figure out if they're point shaving or fixing games. And then look there. Now, also, we do have to think, what are your preventive controls? Sure, policies help. Disciplinary action for offenders, I guess, is a preventive control for future misconduct, although I'm not entirely clear about how successful that is. But really, it's more that if you want to eradicate this, you're going to have to find it. And that means detective controls, that means audits, that means working closely with the third parties in this ecosystem. I do think the sports books are probably good partners here. They don't want to have work under a cloud that you can't trust them. They want fair bets, and they want their participants to feel like I'm getting a fair shake at trying to make some money. So I do think the sports books would love to get rid of this. And so the NBA could partner with them somehow. The NBA has, when it wants to, it's demonstrated that it can do this. That whole Jonte Porter incident that I mentioned, that unfolded over the course of 3 months in 2024 between when he started manipulating his behavior, when the sports books picked up on it, when they gave it to the NBA, when there was an investigation, and when they banned him for life. 3 months. Like, seriously, if you called up your audit committee and said, I think the CFO is involved in accounting fraud, you think it would go from that to him getting fired in 3 months? Probably never, and not at any major company. But when the NBA wants to do this, it can. It's just, it seems to be struggling to do this at scale because this is going to be a persistent issue. And you're right, Tom. I don't know exactly what the solution here is. I think walking away from it is going to push it underground. I don't know that our situation has improved, but I can't say that this situation, having it out in the light, is really very good.
So the material non-public information, of course, is whether or not someone is injured or not. And that turns out on every game day, it's 8 a.m., although I'm not quite sure which time zone, a team has to make an announcement of the status of all of their players. And this material non-public information was being given to gamblers before that announcement, and they were making the bets before then. So I don't know if you would try to move that timeline back, because once the bet's made, the bets aren't voided. The gamblers can collect on them, even if the nefarious conduct is figured out or determined through data analytics, and then something is done after that 8 a.m. time frame. And even switching over to a different sport, the NFL, there was a big to-do about that on Lamar Jackson's status Friday, which was not correctly characterized for his practice sessions, which led people to believe he might have been playing on Sunday. And of course, he wasn't. All of this is incredibly delicate timing on this information, but let's explore prevention. Because in a typical fraud situation, and I'm going to stick with the fraud triangle, not the Pentagon, but if I go with the fraud triangle, pressure rationalization opportunity, how do you prevent someone who's making 20, 40, 5, $10 million a year from giving out information to pick up 5, 10, or even $50,000? It just seemed, at least to me, that the potential loss or cost to you as a player would not be worth the risk.
You would think so. However, let's keep in mind who a lot of professional athletes are. They are young men who have the whole world as their oyster, who have generally, since they were in junior high school onward, been told that they can do no wrong. And frankly, this makes me sound old, but where were their parents? Where were their guidance counselors? Where were their coaches? Where were the other gatekeepers in their lives who could instill some ethical discipline in them? But if you are a 22-year-old who's making zillions and the world is your oyster, and you've been told since you were 12 that you're God's gift to the sport, you can do no wrong, I can kind of see why. And especially if you are a young man who is addicted to gambling, whether it's in crypto or sports betting or anything else like that, there's a natural high that I think people who are older and wiser don't necessarily succumb to that quite as easily. You should think about how we could try and inculcate a better environment for the young athletes who might fall victim to these scammers and predators, which is what the organized crime is. Rationalization of it, I don't know. I have never been in the position where I'm making $40 million a year. And so I don't know how easy it is to rationalize what's an extra 20 grand. I do think that we could talk a bit about the controls around the opportunity to place bets. I think that maybe consequence management is probably important here. Jonte Porter getting banned for life, that certainly sent a signal to other players that they shouldn't do this. Maybe it's not enough. I would like to see some of these people criminally prosecuted just to show everybody you can go to prison for this. Why not even turn it all the way up to 11 and make sure that it's state prosecution and you're doing a hard time in the federal and the state penitentiary, not at Club Fed. Things like that. Maybe that would get the players' attention that this is not something to be done. On the other hand, the worst offender here so far in this whole drama is Chauncey Billups. He is not a young man, and he is older and wiser, and he was doing it too. And so I am really more disappointed in his role in all of this than a 22-year-old player who might or may not be betting on prop bets. That's bad enough. But really, Chauncey Billups, if he is convicted of what he's been accused of, that is terrible.
Now, let me change the focus or change it to, and first of all, I mentioned LeBron James' name a little bit earlier. There's absolutely no allegation that he was involved in any of this. It was a member of his entourage. Mm-hmm. But it brings up the topic of how do you regulate what players say? From all the way, I'm sick and tired of this tanking, I really want to go out here and win, to true non-material public information or material non-public information. My ankle really hurts today, and I don't know if I can go the whole game. And you say that to your personal trainer. Shohei Ohtani, if we move to another sport of baseball, his translator was convicted of huge amounts of fraud, not in this type of gambling scandal, but with another gambling scandal. So how do you have the right people around you? It's not like you can sort of vet your friends, or maybe you can.
That is, I think, a persistent problem in professional sports. And you've seen reference to this phenomena, TV dramas that are supposedly reflective of sports. I'm thinking of that one on HBO back in the 2010s, Ballers, with Dwayne Johnson and Rod Corddry and whatnot. You know, that some of the other ancillary cast of characters in that drama, which was good, were knuckleheads that are floating around. This has actually been a plot line in Law and Order, where once upon a time, a sports star had to get rid of a whole bunch of his people, his entourage, and that led to the usual murder at the top of the show. And I don't remember if the person was acquitted or convicted at the end, but that was just in the last season. This is a perennial problem in professional sports. And it goes back to a lot of these players are relatively young. They have good friends. They've had close friends. They're making a lot of money. And if I were making $40 million a year, I'd probably want to do favors to people too. So I can see that. And I can see that a lot of the entourage who are exposed to non-public information that's very valuable, are we going to start training them too? If you're a professional trainer, yes, you should be. But if you're some player's best friend who happens to know his ankle injury is a lot worse than people understand, are you going to be under an NDA to be friends with your friend from high school who's now playing in the NBA or playing in Major League Baseball? It's tough. I don't know where you draw that line. Easy enough to draw it for professional assistants. I think that's clear. But for social acquaintances who might also be leaking information to the mob or other gambling interests or whatnot, I'm not quite sure how we catch up with that, but that's a weak spot that pro sports teams should be thinking about.
I'd like to say a few words about the investigation involving Mike Rozier, because allegations were made in 2023 before Jonte Taylor made or was banned for life that Rozier had engaged in this conduct, and he was cleared by the NBA. And the NBA said, well, we don't have law enforcement's ability to investigate. And that, it seemed to me, one of the lamest excuses I have ever heard. Civil lawyers, civil litigation lawyers, the Tom Foxes of the world have done investigations. And if you can't directly get information, you keep digging till you find out what you need to find out. And I just found that excuse a terrible indictment of in-house investigators. And I'm sure the NBA has top-notch former FBI in-house investigators. Any really thoughts about that?
Just that is all correct. It is baloney that the NBA says we can only do so much. The NBA does have a lot of power with players. You can make that a contract term that players are going to waive a lot of their rights so that the NBA can conduct investigations as necessary. Or, frankly, if you really want to play hardball, you could tell these players, fine, we will alert the local district attorney or the local U.S. attorney, and they will solve this problem for us. And then maybe players would understand that is not a good idea, and they should cooperate with their employer. It's interesting because they are employees of the NBA, but technically they're employees of the team, and the team's activity is coordinated by the NBA. It's not quite the same, I would think, as a regular employee of a corporation. But nonetheless, these people are paid millions. They have a lot of lawyers and others and agents looking after their own interests, and the NBA has plenty of stellar legal talent too. The NBA has a lot of power to negotiate its way to what it wants, and it's really kind of lame when they say that we can only do so much. I don't think that's true. And like, come on, NBA. How did you botch the investigation in 2023? And this turned right around, and suddenly you had an excellent investigation in 2024 with Jonte Porter, and you got him out. But did you know or not know about Chauncey Billups and the rest in 2025? This does not add up.
Even Major League Baseball got the Houston Astros to admit they cheated on the drum bashing scandal. Any final thoughts about what compliance officers should be looking at here, Matt? Maybe to bring us all home.
Well, definitely you could think about what is the nature of the problem here. Okay, leaking of material, non-public information. And how would you then detect it? And how would you prevent it? Detective controls, preventive controls. And it might well be that just because there are two categories, I'm not saying they're equal. It seems to me in this instance, it's rather lopsided that what you can do is on the detective side. Sure, more training and more policies and more signatures on player handbooks or something like that. But ultimately, you would have to think through, if they're going to do this, how would we find it? And the NBA is lucky that professional sports is probably the most data mined human activity out there. Then there is a rich supply of data. There are a rich supply of third parties, sports books, who are out there analyzing it anyways. And so if you were thinking about misconduct that you would have to detect, well, what's the data we would use to detect it? How would we find that? Have we engineered our processes so that we're creating this digital exhaust that we can then study, which the NBA in sports has done, but how would that work in corporations? And then do we have the right tools or business partners to be able to analyze all of that data to find out if we have an incident or not? The NBA seems to be pretty good on doing that when it wants. And I think that's the big lesson here about risk assessment, sources of data for analysis, data analytics. Who are your natural allies in the extended enterprise to help get to this? That's the kind of stuff I'd be thinking about here.
I think we're going to be visiting this topic again, Matt.
Thank you, Tom.